Yes, we've just enabled the chat, so feel free. I just got a couple of messages. Feel free to drop in the chat where you're from, where you're joining us from, your name and organization. It should be working now. So thank you all for joining our first Tadamon Talks. For our latest Tadamon Talks. I'm Svetla Baeva. I'm the communications lead with United Nations Development Program at Europe and Central Asia, and I'm going to be moderating our session today. So for those of you who are just joining, we currently have Arabic translation as well. So if you need it, you can select it from the control panel at the bottom of the screen. If you're here with us for the very first time, our Tadamon Talks webinar series explores lots of different ways to empower civil society. So we've looked at how to embrace alternative finance, new technologies, and other best practices that civil society organizations can employ. And in our past series, as you know, we've explored a range of different topics, from good crowdfunding tactics and storytelling to digital transformation from nonprofits, and for example, the future of health tech and how that can be harnessed by nonprofits. So my colleagues are going to drop in the chat a little bit more about Tadamon. Our series is powered by Tadamon. It's a cross-regional community platform for civil society empowerment. It's sponsored by the Islamic Solidarity Fund for Development and managed by the Islamic Development Bank and implemented by the United Nations Development Program. And for this month's Tadamon Talks, we're really excited to have with us Kivi Leroy Miller. She's the founder and CEO of Nonprofit Marketing Guide, and the author of a book called Content Marketing for Nonprofits. And I've had the pleasure of taking part in a training run by Kivi in the past, and I noticed she's a communications guru, and the wealth of resources that she's created together with the platform are really instrumental as a tool for nonprofits all around the world. And today we have the opportunity to have her with us today at Tadamon Talks. She's going to be talking a little bit about nonprofit marketing and communication strategies, how to build your strategy, tactics to amplify your mission and support your campaigns, and so forth. And so before we start, as I mentioned already, the webinar is going to be English and with translation in Arabic. We're also currently recording this session and streaming it live on Facebook, so feel free to follow us there as well, and share the link if you'd like with your community. And before we dive into the core part of our session today, I'd just briefly like to invite our partners at ISDB and ISFD for some short welcoming remarks. So I'd like to give the floor to Eyas, who's the program officer at ISDB.
Thank you, Svelta. Thank you, everyone. So good morning, good afternoon, all over the world. Again, my name is Eyas, and I'm from the Islamic Development Bank, working with this amazing team for Tadamon program. And I would like to start with a quote where my supervisor, the master, was always telling us communication is a key. So communication, it's not about languages, it's about to be smart. Communication, it's about to reach to your target audience using the right tools. And today we are lucky that we have such a distinguished speaker, Kivi Miller, who's specialized on this area of communication, mainly for the civil society organization and non-for-profit. On behalf of the Islamic Solidarity Fund for Development and Islamic Development Bank, we would like to welcome you on this Tadamon 12. We call it Tadamon Talks, because on a monthly basis, we have a special talk with a special topic to cover these topics after tremendous work that we have worked and we have done, both CSOs and our partner UNDP and us, working with the CSOs from 57 countries worldwide, CSOs from different contexts. CSOs from stable or fragile, or CSOs affected by a conflict area, CSOs from all levels. And we have picked up this topic based on the needs of the CSOs. Today, we will have, as I mentioned before, that a guest who has a wide experience on this area of communication. And I'm sure that you will gain a lot of today's talk. And if I were you, I will bother also to ask questions to know more about the communication and the importance of communication. Last but not least, our program, Tadamon, it's for you as a CSOs. Again, I would rather advise you to visit tadamon.community, where you will know more about our activity, about our training capacity building, about the grant that we are offering for CSOs, also about the events that we are conducting both online and physically. And finally, I would like to thank our colleague from UNDP Istanbul Regional Bureau, mainly Hadijana, Svelta, and Burchus for doing a great work of gathering all of us today here. And this is not the first or the last time that they are doing that. And I wish that you will gain the best from today's talk. Thank you, and back to Svelta.
Thank you so much, AS. I don't want to take more time, so I would like to give the floor to Kivi to kind of bring us into the communications world.
All right, thank you, Ais and Svelta, for the warm welcome. I will share my screen. All right, greetings from the US. It's morning here, so you all are my first conversation today, so it's an honor to be here with you. We are in the middle of spring in North Carolina, and so lots of pollen, and so I apologize for my scratchy throat. I'll try to mute the mic so I don't cough in your ear as we go along today. I do want to encourage you to ask lots of questions. I like to take questions throughout the presentation, so I will be stopping at different points and asking us about left. There are those questions that I should answer on the webinar. So please feel free to chat those in as we go along, and we'll take them as we go. So as you heard, my name is Kibby LaRue Miller. I have a company called Nonprofit Marketing Guide, and our mission is to help nonprofit communicators, civil society organization communicators, really learn how to do the work, but also to love the work and to stay in the work. We know that a lot of you could be doing other things with your life, but we want you to stay in this work. And so we want you to enjoy the work and to love the work as well as to learn it. I've written 3 books. Some of them are translated, and they are often used in university programs here in North America. We also do what we call the Nonprofit Communications Trends Report, which is a free report every year where we poll nonprofit communicators and try to understand what's going on in their lives. So we take a very practical approach to the work, and again, very human-centered. We want the people doing the work to love the work and to be happy in it. As I said, please ask questions as we go along. Makes it a little more interesting for me, and I think it certainly makes it more interesting for you if I'm able to address the very specific questions that you do have. So please chat those in, and as I said, Svelta is going to help moderate those for me. So the first thing we want to understand is that communications work is a lot harder than it looks. And everybody thinks they can be a great communicator. We all know how to talk. We all know how to type on a keyboard. And so everyone thinks they can do it well. But the reality is that not everybody can do it well. Especially in the last 20 years, communications online has become increasingly complicated and difficult and challenging. And so there's a lot to juggle. We have more ways than ever before to communicate with other people. We have lots of different choices about who we talk to and what we say, because we do have that access to so many more people. So it really is quite complicated now, and therefore it's a lot harder than it looks. So it's important to keep a number of factors in mind to keep yourself centered on what's most important. And that's really what I'm going to focus on today, are what I consider the key elements of successful communications in the CSO sector. So we'll start by talking about what you're trying to achieve with your communications. And then we'll look at the 3 most important questions that you should be asking yourself and answering all of the time. These questions should be rattling around in your brain all the time. And then we'll talk a little bit about planning and thinking forward so that you can get the best results. So first of all, we need to talk about what you're trying to accomplish. Why are you communicating? And we often use the word community engagement as the catch-all. We're trying to get people engaged in our work. But what does that really mean? So I break down that big word engagement into 3 different approaches. One is just awareness. Do they even know that the organization exists? Is the issue that we're talking about even on their radar? Is it something that they are even thinking about at all? So it's that basic introduction to you as an organization and the basic introduction to the topics or issues that you're working on. Next, we have some interaction. So they know who you are, and now they're starting to have a little bit of conversation with you. So on social media, this might be liking your posts or commenting on your posts. On email or text message, direct messaging, it might be sharing those messages with other people. But there's a little bit of that conversation, that back and forth starting to happen between you and the folks you're trying to reach. And then finally, we have what we call participation. And this is related to whatever your call to action is. And we'll talk about the calls to action in a minute, but it's the thing you want people to do. So are they doing that thing? Sometimes it's donating to you or volunteering, but it might even be talking to other people about your issue in a different way. Lots of times we really want to just change hearts and minds and the conversation around certain issues. So are people now changing that conversation that they're having with their own friends and family? That may be how you define participation. So as you're thinking about why you're communicating, I think it's helpful to think about these different stages. What are we doing to raise awareness and to introduce? What are we doing to start that conversation? And then how are we communicating to get people to actually do something differently? And as you're going through this, there are ways that you can start to measure whether your communications are working. Now, for a lot of you, trying to measure is going to be too much work, right? You just need to focus on being a good communicator and not worry so much about trying to measure it. But for those of you that are ready to measure it, there are a couple of different ways that you can think about measuring your communications work. So are people following you on social media? Are they joining your mailing lists? Are they subscribing to your email? That's an indicator of awareness. Then are they following through? Are they doing things that you're asking them to do? So how are they participating? Are more people participating this year than last year? Are more people participating after you started using Instagram more, for example? Are you changing the way that people think, their knowledge and understanding of issues? Are people learning from you? And can you measure how much they're learning? Lots of times you can do before and after surveys. For example, if you're doing a webinar, you could survey people before, do the webinar, and survey them after to see how much they're learning. Are you increasing demand or desire for something? If you provide services to people, are more people seeking those services? Are people changing their tone or attitude? A lot of what we do in the nonprofit world is try to change the way people think about issues. And so do you see that change in tone or attitude? That's often very hard to measure, but you can gauge change in tone and attitude by something as simple as comments on social media. Are there fewer negative comments, more positive comments, more people willing to engage in the conversation with you? Are people expressing that they're maybe not ready to participate, but are they ready? Are they showing readiness or empowerment? They're getting there, they're preparing to participate. And then finally, are they changing their own behavior? Again, this can sometimes be hard to measure, but if you think ahead about what your outcome really is, even if you can't exactly measure it, your communications will be far better because you'll be focused on the end goal. We aren't communicating just to put our own words out into the world. We're communicating to make change in the world. And what does that change look like? These are some of your choices in figuring out what that change should look like. As I said, this is hard, especially if you're trying to measure it, but it's okay. You can do this. And even if you don't measure, again, just knowing in your mind where you're headed will get you much further along in being strategic and making good choices about your communications work. So as we go through the rest of our program here today, we're going to focus on 3 questions, and we call this the quick and dirty marketing plan. So what we mean by quick and dirty is it's something fast. You're not spending a lot of time on it. You're not making it into a beautiful document strategy, all designed with lovely colors and fonts. It's the kind of thing you can grab just a quick scrap of paper and just scribble out. Okay, so that's what we mean by quick and dirty. And there are 3 questions. Who are we talking to? So we call this our target audience. What are we saying? So we call this our messaging or our calls to action. And then where are we going to deliver that message? How are we going to give that message to those people? Okay, we're answering these 3 questions all the time. And as we change an answer to one, we have to think about the impact on the others. There's always this impact, okay? But we often do start our conversations with the answer to one question. So for example, maybe we know we're launching a new website or a new social media channel. We're doing a new communications channel. And we're very excited about this because we've launched this new way to talk to people. So then the question is, well, what is this about? What is this new website about? Or what are we now putting on social media? Well, let's just pretend that we have some new science, some new research that's available. Okay, well, who wants that research? Who is going to use that website? We have to answer the who question before we can really develop our strategy. Okay, so let's say, like I said, you usually know the answer to one, and you have to figure out the other 2 and how those match. So let's say, for example, instead of knowing the how, we know the message. We want people to adopt some new practice. We want them to do something differently. Okay, then what? Well, how do we move forward? We might want to know who we're talking to, who we want to get to adopt that new practice. So let's just say we're going to talk to farmers. I'm going to use a little bit of agriculture examples today, because in my personal life, I work with our farmers market as a volunteer. So I do a lot of farming and agriculture examples. So we have this new practice that we want farmers to adopt. Okay, how are we going to get that message about new practices out to farmers? That's our next question. So we have to think about that. What is the best way to reach farmers when we're talking about doing something new? You're constantly making these changes. Okay, so again, we're going to say we're still talking about our new farming practice, but now we're not going to reach farmers directly. We want to reach other influencers. So maybe we want to reach people in the media, or we want to reach people that blog about farming, or we want to reach government officials or other larger CSOs, larger nonprofits. People that would be influencing the farmers. The how we do that is likely going to be very different when we're speaking to more of that influencer professional crowd who don't farm themselves, but who talk about farming, as opposed to how we speak directly to farmers who are actually doing the work on the ground. So we're constantly weighing the decisions we're making in this circle and adjusting as we go. Now, our brains are incredibly effective filters. Okay, so we're going to focus a little more on the who specifically here. And one of the things our brains do very well is to sort out what information we think is for us and what information we think is not for us. So we all get thousands of messages a day into our eyeballs, into our ears, that we can feel with our hands. We're constantly taking in data as human beings, and our brain is sorting all of this, right? So how do we get through to someone if their filter is filtering out our things and we think our message is getting to them, but it's really not? How do we get through that filter? We have to be relevant. We have to change the filter so people see our thing as suddenly relevant to them instead of dismissing it right away. So how do we do that? Well, we have to know who we are speaking to. And there are a couple of different ways, some marketing lingo that we use to talk about breaking down all of the people that you're talking to. So we talk about segmenting audience into groups. So we want to break down the whole world that we're trying to talk to into more specific groups, because that's going to allow us to both, again, tailor the message and tailor the communications channels. So let's just say that we do work in the agriculture or food systems world. So that's a kind of fruit, right? It's not all the food, because we're just going to pretend we're a fruit working in agriculture. But even within fruit, you can break it down into different kinds of fruit. And so you'll have different segments of your target audience. So maybe our farmers working in the land are oranges. Maybe the grocers or retailers or people that sell the produce, there are apples. And maybe people that are doing research who might be part of your CSO, who are looking at better ways to farm, they might be the pears. So we're all still fruit. We all still care about agriculture, but we're different kinds of fruit. And so we need to speak to those different kinds of fruit differently. As you're going through, you will also find that you have different categories of people that you're speaking to. And so one of the approaches that we use, we call the PSI, for participants, supporters, and influencers. So participants are the people that are actually using your services, engaged in the work. You all today are participants in the talks. Then we have supporters. So people that are supporting our work, people that are funding our work, people that are helping us get the job done. And then we have influencers, and they sort of talk about the things that we're talking about too, and maybe good messengers, but they're not really using our services and they're not actively engaged in supporting the work directly. So we want to think about these different categories of audiences as we figure out who we're talking to and what our message to them should be. I want to leave something very important with you, which is that if you were trying to reach everyone, the general public, all the people, you are reaching no one. No one. And again, this goes back to the filters, because we all think we are super special individual people. And so if you are speaking very generically to everyone, then I don't think you're speaking to me, because I'm not everyone. And we all feel that way. So again, we're all searching for things that are relevant to us, which means that you have to speak to more specific groups than trying to reach everybody. So you need to know who your somebodies are. Who are the people that are most important to you? Those are the people you need to construct your messages for. And those are the people that you need to build your communications platform around. So how do we figure out what fruit people are? So you can use demographics. So that would be things like age, location, profession, education level. Those are all demographics. And sometimes that's good enough. If you were trying to reach people of a certain age, you're trying to reach 18 to 24-year-olds, or you're trying to reach people over 50, then demographics can be helpful. But sometimes the age or the location doesn't really matter. You're more focused on the issues And you're fine with having people who are 20 and people who are 60 following you. In that case, you want to use what we call psychographics instead of demographics. And psychographics are really about how people think or feel about an issue and sort of what else they like. So what are some of the things they do in their free time? That can be an indicator of a psychographic. So when we're talking about people, again, we really want to focus on these smaller groups of people. And we also need to remember that it's easier for people to do nothing, right? We have to really motivate and encourage people to do something differently. And especially as civil society organizations, we're usually trying to encourage some sort of change. And so people need to be motivated for that change. And so as we're trying to figure out our messaging, we're still trying to understand our target audience. And one of the best ways to think about understanding the psychographics of your target audience is to understand their fears and to understand their desires. Now, I don't mean fear like, we're going to scare you. That's not what I mean. Fears can be challenges, problems, questions, roadblocks. It's the things that are holding people back a little bit from wanting to listen to you or wanting to follow through on your call to action. What's slowing them down? That can be a fear. And the biggest fear of all that motivates action is the fear of loss. So if we have something, whether it's human rights or access to some kind of service or whatever it is, if we feel we have something now, we will be motivated by losing that thing more than anything else. It's just human nature. We want to hold on to what we have, whether that's something real that we can touch, or whether it's more of a feeling like safety, or again, access to something, or happiness or hope for our children's future. We will fight and to protect those things. So thinking back to your target audience, what's in their way? What are their problems? What are their challenges? What are they afraid of losing? Understanding how they feel and think is going to allow you to create better messaging for them. Now, on the other hand, desire also drives us. So what can desire look like? It can look like our hope for the future, for our children, for our neighbors, for our community. It can look like dreams that we have. We're envisioning a different new reality if we bring about this change that we're working on. It can be a sense of comfort, a sense of security around something. So again, you can go at it from either the fear side or the desire side, but really try to understand what's going on in people's heads, in your target audience's heads. Another way that you can document this is a tool that you can use. Again, very simple. You just grab a piece of paper, do it there. It's called an empathy map. And so you think about your target audience and you think, okay, what do these people, what does this group of people, so this, you could do this for the farmers, for example. You could do it for the researchers that do agricultural research. So what do these people say a lot? What comes out of their mouth? What do they do? How are they spending their day? What are they thinking? And then what are they feeling? And you can just document this for each of your different target audiences and see how they differ and see how they are the same. And that's going to allow you to create better messaging and to use better ways of delivering that message if you understand your target audience. So to summarize this section, who we're talking to, and then I'm going to stop to see if there are any questions I can answer right now. We need to talk to specific groups of people, segments. We can't talk to everyone. We need to find our right mix of participants in our programming, supporters of what we're doing, and influencers. And then we need to understand how people feel, how they think, what their fears and desires are, so that we can create the best communications for them. Okay, so any questions I can answer?
Hi, Kiwi. Thanks so much. This is really a lot of really interesting insights. I have one first question. We have a couple of questions that maybe don't fit this section. We might leave them till the end.
Okay, great.
But I did want to ask something that's very specific to our target audiences. And sometimes a lot of nonprofits have one of their biggest difficulties is defining the target, like who. If we don't have specific services, if we don't have specific beneficiaries, sometimes we don't really know who our target audience is. And
Right.
do you have any suggestions and tools in terms of how really to understand who our target audience is? In my work, for example, I've sometimes done simple things like just go out on the street and speak to potential target audience. A potential target audience and see and try to understand exactly what you were talking about, their fears or desires or challenges or problems, to kind of better understand who is that person, for example, on social media and so forth.
Yes.
But
Yeah. So this is a very common problem. So no worries. Most people either feel very strongly they know who their target audience is, and then they have to create the right messaging, or they know their message. They know what they want to talk about, but they're not sure who to talk to. So I feel like that's your second question there. You know what your issue is, but you're not sure who to talk to, right? And so everybody is starting with one or the other, and then you have to solve the piece that you're missing. So we're going to get in next to messaging. And I think, if the next session makes a lot more sense to you, start there and then see who responds to that messaging. And that's going to give you an indication of who your target audience probably is. We want to start with people that are already leaning our way, that are receptive to the messages that we're putting out there, and to build our target audience around them before we go trying to change minds. Changing minds is a lot harder to do if you gather the people around you who are already leaning your way. It's a lot easier than to build that coalition that can go out and do the harder work of changing minds.
And we have one question that's a little bit related to crisis marketing, but also about finding the right target audience. The question is, the organization is thinking about launching a service. They have an idea about it, and they post it online that they're planning to do this, and they get a bunch of responses that are quite negative in terms of asking for their credentials, who they are, why do they think that they can deliver such a service. How do you think? What do you think is a good response in that situation?
So let's just assume that you're going to do a good service and that you know what you're doing, right? So then we have a problem with the target audience and the channel. You're not reaching the right people through that communications channel. If you want to reach the people who are going to be supportive and excited, maybe there's a different communications channel to reach those people, or maybe you should talk about it in a different way. It's always this twisting between the three questions. And if one isn't working, then you have to switch the other two up or change that one that's not working.
Thanks so much, Kiwi. I think we can go forward.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead and go into what we're saying now. So that's our messaging. Oops, I just slid my Zoom bar around here. Here we go. Okay, so what are we saying? We've talked about who we're talking to. What are we saying? So this is where you want to start with what we call your call to action, the thing that you want people to do. And we want to be very clear and specific with what we want people to do. So these are some of the words that we often use when we're talking generically, right? Help us, support us, participate, engage, connect, promote, share, collaborate. The problem with these words is that as an individual, I don't know what any of these look like. These are nice words when we're talking from organization to organization. But if I said, Svetla, I really need you to please connect. And that's all I asked Svetla to do. She doesn't know whether I'm talking about connecting on social media or showing up at an event or reading my newsletter. She doesn't know what I'm talking about. So we have to get really specific with our calls to action. These are all fine words when we're writing fundraising proposals and speaking to other organizations, but they don't tell people what you want them to actually do. How do I help you? I don't know. Are you asking me to send you money? Are you asking me to come volunteer? Are you asking me to call my friend for you? You have to be very, very clear about what your call to action is. And this is sort of a funny quote that's in a book by some researchers who do a lot of research on behavioral, they call it behavioral economics, how people make decisions and how they behave. A jerk with a map is better than a saint without one, which is basically just saying you need to tell people what to do. Even if you're not sure if they're going to do it right, it's better to give them some guidance about what to do than to just not do anything at all. So give them a map. So with that specific call to action in mind, we know what we're going to ask people to do now. We have to make it relevant. So again, the filters in our mind that are like looking for the things that are just for us, and we ignore the things that are not for us. How do we make it relevant? What does that mean? Well, we've defined at Nonprofit Marketing Guide what we call the 6 R's of message relevance. So I'm going to go through each of these 6, and I'm going to use a little agriculture example just to kind of give you a sense for different ways to use your messaging to make it more relevant to your target audiences. So the first thing we want to be is rewarding. So being rewarding is about making people see the benefit immediately of your call to action. So it might make them feel good about themselves. It might make them feel like they're doing something good. It might let them express their values and to feel good about who they are as a person. They might know that they're helping someone else. So let's just say we're going to ask people to register for a training on farming during drought. Okay, so put yourself in the position of working for a CSO who is trying to help farmers grow better food and there's drought. All right, so how are we going to make this messaging more rewarding? Well, we could say something like, plan today so you can rest easier knowing that you did all you could. So you can't stop the drought, but you can be ready. And so the reward in this case is eliminating some of that uncertainty and anxiety about not knowing what to do during the drought. At least you'll have a plan. Be realistic. This means really, again, understanding your target audience, knowing where they're coming from, knowing what's possible for them. You can't ask people to do something really hard and expect them to do it. You have to put together the baby steps. What is the first step they can take to prepare to do that hard thing, for example? So we have to acknowledge the struggle to follow through. Some of the things we're asking people to do are scary. There may be stigma associated with it. They may be wondering, if I do this thing, what are they going to think? What is my family going to think? So we have to understand that and be realistic. And we want to make it very easy for people to follow through. So we want to think about step by step instead of asking them to do everything all at once. So again, registering for a training about farming and drought. How can we make that more realistic? We can say drought is daunting. Confront it head on with agricultural professionals and other farmers experiencing drought. So we're being realistic here that this is going to be hard to manage, and we're inviting others to join in with other farmers so that they can do it together. That's realistic. We want to be real time. We want to be timely. So using words like now, today, this week, update, tying things in tying your messaging to things that are happening in the news already, or in your popular culture already, things that have already made it through the filter. They're already in people's brains. How can you tie your thing to that? Helping people feel current and knowledgeable and in the know. And then also, making people feel connected to what is happening now. So you don't have to wait for big success at the end. You can talk about your small little wins along the way. So back to our farming workshop, how are we going to make this call to action to register for this workshop more timely, more real time? We can say the drought is going on for months, but now is the time to create the plan. So we're going to focus on what you can do right now, creating your plan. Being responsive is about making sure that people understand you're listening to them, that there really is this dialogue going on. People want to be known, they want to be heard, and they want you to understand them and to be helpful. So answering questions that people have, confirming when they're doing the right thing, and congratulating them. So to make our workshop more responsive, we could say, we will be here for you as you create your plan. We're only a phone call away, and we'll help you implement what you're learning in the workshop. Being revealing. So people like to learn new things. They like to know what's going on behind the scenes. They want to know what's happening after everyone else has stopped watching. What happened next? So to be more revealing, you can use statistics sometimes. So 60% of farmers might have a drought management plan, but 100% will be dealing with drought. So now you're thinking, oh, who are these 40% that aren't even planning? Is that me? Maybe I should go to the drought management workshop. So I'm in that 60%. And then finally, we want to just do some things differently. We want to be refreshing. So this is where you can use fun little surprises. Maybe you're using humor. Maybe you have a different kind of messenger that's a little different than your usual. You can express a funny opinion, or it doesn't have to be funny. It can be a serious opinion, but just to say something that sort of catches people's attention. And, sometimes this is hard to do with some of our topics, but just sort of playing with the language can be a little fun. So we can't make it rain, but we can flood you with information about how to survive a drought. Okay, so those are some ways we're figuring out who our people are. We're trying to make our content more relevant to them. We've gone through those 6 ways to think about relevancy. Are there any questions I can take now, Svetla?
Yeah, I think there's one really good question in the Q&A box. It relates to, particularly to fundraising, asking for donations circumstances, in which sometimes we portray our beneficiaries as victims, as powerless victims. So, I mean, the question in the Q&A chat box is about people with disabilities. And they say, like, what are kind of some of the tools to change this? Because we don't want to portray our beneficiaries as victims, but, they have used this as a way to fundraise and to get donations. And in some cases, the people who donate like being seen as a hero themselves. In this type of situation, but they want to change this dynamic because they feel they're perpetuating a narrative that is very damaging to that particular beneficiary, to that particular group. And I think this relates not only to people with disabilities, but many other.
Absolutely. Wonderful question. So there is definitely a big conversation happening in North America, absolutely, around this. So some of the things that you would want to Google would be things like ethical fundraising, ethical storytelling, community-based fundraising, community-centered fundraising. And that's some of the language that we're using in North America that contrasts with what might be called donor-centered fundraising, for example. And it really is a spectrum. My point of view is that you always want to fundraise with dignity for the people that you're fundraising for. You should never be embarrassed for someone who that you're fundraising for, so in this case, a disabled individual in your community, to see your fundraising materials. If that person would see your fundraising materials and feel some kind of shame or anxiety or anger towards you, then it's not a good decision to use that language. Instead, what I encourage you to do is to think about the desire of your donors. Think about what they want for themselves that they would also want for your community members. So it could be things like to have work that is satisfying, to have clean shelter, safe shelter, whatever it is that you're providing to your community, regardless of the disability, you're doing it a little bit differently because you're serving people with disabilities, but you're still meeting a human need. You're still taking care of them. You're still generating hope. You're giving them purpose in the world. And you can connect that to the purpose of your donors too. Human beings want to contribute to their community. So if your programming is helping the people with disabilities contribute in a different way, or keeping them safe, everybody wants to contribute and to feel safe. So, explain how that's not happening for your clientele and some of the problems that are in the way, some of those barriers, some of the fears they live with, and then encourage your donors to provide that hope and that alternative. Does that make sense? It's not about, pity. It's not about, oh, these poor people, I have to come in and help them. That's not it at all. It's really about appealing to their humanity and helping them see that they can help others feel the same thing: hope, happiness, community.
Thanks so much, Kiwi. We have actually another question, which I think is an interesting question, especially in cases where beneficiaries are very vulnerable and also not willing to show their faces. So
Yes.
It's very difficult, for example, to do communications type of work that includes photography or video. So they're asking how to create communications materials that spark and engage people and still maintain authenticity.
Yes.
I have a suggestion for that, but I'd like to hear what you have to say as well.
So, it's important to be as authentic as possible while still protecting the privacy of the people that you're serving. So you can change, like in the sort of storytelling, you can change names, you can change details that aren't really material to the story. But today we know we need imagery, right? We need photography for everything, really. And so there are a couple of different ways you can go about this. If you have someone who is a really good photographer, it's a lot easier, because what you can do is you can you can photograph the people in different lighting so that their face is obscured, but you can still see there's a person there. We have also had, I work with a number of organizations that deal with children. And so you obviously don't want to identify the children, but what they'll do is sort of take a picture of their backpack or, their school books and maybe their hand. The backs of people can be done very well within the context, or again, just really tight close-ups on, individual parts. Hands we see a lot. Sometimes, we'll just see sort of this part of somebody with their head turned. So, you can also use stock photography. You can use other sort of actors. That's okay. But generally, you want to use the real people and just be more creative with the photography if you can. Svetla, what would you add to that?
I would add illustration. That's also
Yes.
another way to go about it. Illustration. And
Great suggestion.
Sometimes you can't film them, but you can hear their voices. So you can use audio. I think that's, I've worked with women prisoners in the past, and I think that's also a good way to get
Yes.
get stories.
There are
Yeah.
also so many creative filters now on your smartphones. So even just using some of those different filters that create more of that illustrated look, or you know, if you change some of the lighting scales or change some of the colors, it really does sort of change the way you look. So you can use some of those to really obscure identity as well. I want to make sure we finish on time, so I'm going to go ahead and get us through the rest of the slides, and then hopefully we'll have a few more questions. So again, we're doing this quick and dirty plan. So we're talking about who we're talking to, what we're saying, and now how are we going to deliver that message to those people? Everything you say, you need to say repeatedly in different places. So one of the rules that we share with folks is don't create something unless you know how you're going to use it 3 times. You've got to use your messaging over and over and over. And you also want to think about who your best messengers are. And then think about how often you communicate. So let's talk a little bit more about each of these things. When I say use it in 3 different places, there are so many different places that you can be using your content. So as I'm sitting down, anytime you touch the keyboard with your hand or you're tapping on your phone, think about 3 different places that content you're creating is going to go. You don't have enough time. None of us have enough time as communication professionals to create something brand new every single time we're typing. So always be thinking about different ways that you're going to repurpose your content. And then think about who your messenger is. Again, this is when you're going back to participants and influencers in particular. Are there participants who are better at delivering the message to other potential participants? So this more peer-to-peer communication is what we call it in the marketing lingo. Are there influencers who might be good folks? And it doesn't, you know, I'm not talking about like the famous people with millions of followers. I'm just talking about people in your community. Who are the people in your community that everyone listens to, or that seems to know things before everybody else? You know, can they be helpful to you? So people who look and sound like the people that you're trying to reach, trusted community leaders, and then also using stories and testimonials from some of your participants to encourage others. You know, they really become the voice when you use people's stories. And then also think about your channels that you're using, because some channels are going to be more trusted by different segments of people than others. Whether that is your sort of broadcast media or the apps that people use or the groups that they're in. Some are going to be more trusted than others, depending on the audiences that you're trying to reach. So try to understand that and to use the appropriate ones. You also need to repeat yourself all the time. Remember those thousands of messages that are hitting all of our eyeballs and our ears every single day. If you just say something one time, it's never going to get done. So think about what you think seems like an appropriate number of times to repeat your message, and then double or even triple it. You've got to say it much more often. Nonprofits are constantly afraid that they are saying too much and over communicating. And the reality is they're almost always not doing it often enough, because again, we have those filters in our own brains, and then social media has its own filters, the algorithms. So if I post something on Facebook, maybe 10% of my followers might see it, and they might only see it for a second on the feed. Facebook counts that as being seen when you're scrolling like this. And then that hasn't even gone through the filter in my brain about whether something is relevant or not. So you have to repeat yourself so much to get it through. If you are starting to feel bored about saying the same thing over and over again, that's an indicator that you need to still go ahead and double and triple it. You being bored with your messaging has nothing to do with whether it's getting through or not. Okay, so again, Think about what you're trying to achieve. Am I trying to raise awareness? Am I trying to get more interaction with this communication? Am I trying to get people to do something, to follow through on a call to action? And then work those questions. Who am I talking to? What's my message? How am I delivering that message? And you're constantly changing the answers to those questions to create a strategy that really works. Now, for those of you that, and I know this is not most of you, but for those of you that are doing communications work full-time, just want to put out that there are lots of different tools that you can use. These are the kinds of things that we train people on at nonprofitmarketingguide.com. So if you really want to dive into some of these more sophisticated tools for communications professionals, we certainly have lots of free information on our website, on our blog to help you. You can also register and get the information there on our website. So that is it in terms of my slides. I know we're close to the top of the hour, Svelva, but I'm happy to take any questions you want to throw my way.
Thanks so much, Kiwi, for the wonderful presentation. I'm just going to drop in the chat a link to your website and platform. This is the Nonprofit Marketing Guide. I think it's a wonderful resource and definitely gives you a very practical oriented way of looking at communications and building strategies. We had a question about communications tools, courses, and books. So I think you kind of gave a really good list there. But if you want to mention anything else that you think might be interesting for the audience.
There's so much information online, really. So, you don't really have to pay for anything if you don't want to. On Fridays on our blog, we do something we call mixed links. And it's sort of a summary of the interesting things that we have come across during the week. So it's sort of like a little digest. So that's a good place to start. And from there, you'll be able to click over to other resources that we trust and like as well.
Thanks, Kiwi. And we have 1-2 questions, I think, in the Q&A box, which I think are quite interesting. Someone asked, should we really go and do thorough research about our target audience before we do posting on social media? So before we prepare a social media strategy?
I think you want to do some. I don't know about how thorough you want to be, but I think you want to know who you're trying to reach, because the language choices you'll make will be very different. I mean, just look at age. If you're trying to reach someone who is 20, their vocabulary is different than the vocabulary of someone my age. I'm 54. I live with a 17-year-old and I have a 20-year-old daughter. The way they speak is not the way that my husband and I speak when it's just the two of us. So even just word choice can be influenced by target audience. So I think you want to have a little bit of a sense of it.
Thanks so much. There was another question which I think is quite interesting. It's in relation to work around LGBTI equality and crafting messages around that, especially in countries, I think, where it's a controversial issue, and how can we create better messages in which we focus on LGBT equality, but at the same time not alienate people who might be oppose equality.
So you have to understand that you're not going to get everyone on your side, especially at first. You win people over slowly on an issue like this at first, and then it grows over time. So we have something called the snowball effect, which probably doesn't make a lot of sense in places without snow, but it's this idea that you start small and that as you roll, it gets bigger over time. And so if you're in that place where you're still small, you want to focus on the people who are most likely, again, leaning your way. They understand the human rights issues. They may know and have family and friends who identify as LGBTQIA. And so you want to start with those people, and then it starts to go pretty quickly. I mean, that's what we really saw in the US about marriage equality. That is one of the issues that changed faster than any other civil rights issue in the US. And it's because more LGBTQ people came out to their friends and family. And so now we had more friends and family who understood, oh, I want my brother to be, to be able to marry his boyfriend. I want my cousin. I want my daughter. I love my family. I love my friends. There's nothing wrong with these people. So you start over time. And, it really starts with providing that comfort and that protection to people that are closer in, so they feel like they can talk, and the families can talk, and their friends can talk. And then this wave builds, right? Where you can really start to address people who maybe originally just thought that was a terrible idea. But you have to start small and grow it.
Thanks, Kiwi. Definitely, and also appealing to common values. So, as in other countries, appealing to love and pride, and I think
yes, absolutely,
something you can use in your messaging. And I think we have time to take one more question. Someone asked whether your tools are inclusive of communicators with disabilities.
So we ask that you let us know if there's a particular type of technology you want to use for our webinars, for example. So we do have notes in different places on the website that say, if you're hard of hearing or have vision issues, to let us know your preferred technology, and we'll try to work with you. So, it really just depends on where you are in the world. Our website we're trying to make it better, more accessible. So there's some software we're using to allow some of that to work, but I would say give it a try. And if it's not accessible, I'm open to hearing what we can do to make it better.
Thanks so much, Kiwi. I hope that answers your question, Louis. And I think we have one final question from Ishako in the Q&A box. He asks, is it good to post and publish everything that an organization does?
So let's go back to our 3 questions, right? So that's your message, right? That would be everything. So who's interested in it, and what is the best way? I don't know the answer. That's something you need to figure out. You need to figure out who your target audience is and what communications channels you're using. And then if all of that messaging is appropriate to those 2 other questions.
Thank you so much. I think those are all the questions for today. And thank you for everyone that stayed on with us. We had a big group today. And thank you, Kiwi, so much for.
It's been my pleasure.
You gave us a really good run through, the main components of, building a communication strategy, and keeping those different components in mind throughout your work, and the importance of coming back and reflecting upon our work. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming to our Tadamon Talks. We have another Tadamon Talk scheduled for next month, so stay tuned. We'll be announcing the topic soon. And everyone have a wonderful morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are.
Thank you so much. You're welcome.